The footage played for the 11th time that morning, and High Commander Dreth still had no answer for what he was watching. 3 human ships. Scout class, small things. The Empire used vessels like these to carry messages between stations, to ferry minor officials to meetings that did not matter. There was nothing about them that should have been frightening. The Eternal Dominion was a Theron-class warship, 2.4 kilometers long, 48 plasma batteries, a shielding array that had cost more to build than most colonies cost to establish, 400 crew, 9 engagements across 30 years, no losses that mattered. The 3 human ships approached it, as if they knew the answer to a question no one had thought to ask. The first ship moved left at an angle that the Dominion's automatic threat system classified as non-threatening, because no ship at that speed could safely turn at that angle. The system was correct about the physics. It was wrong about whether the human ship cared. The ship turned anyway, held together anyway, and pulled the Dominion's port batteries into full tracking mode. The second ship in that same instant broadcast on 14 frequencies simultaneously. Not a signal, not communication, pure noise built with a specific harmonic pattern that would later take the Empire's analysts 3 weeks and a great deal of argument to decode. The Dominion's targeting system began filtering it, because filtering noise was what targeting systems did. It took 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, the third human ship crossed inside the Dominion's minimum engagement distance, through the triangular shadow created by the first ship's draw on the port batteries and the second ship's draw on the targeting array. It threaded something through the forward exhaust port. The exhaust port gap was the diameter of a drainage pipe. It existed because of a design compromise in the Theron-class cooling system. The gap had been in the engineering documents for 30 years. It was listed as a known limitation. Every engineer who had reviewed the Dominion's schematics knew it was there. The humans had not seen the schematics. They had watched a Theron-class warship during normal operations and found the gap themselves, from the outside, through thermal imaging and extended observation. The Eternal Dominion was gone in 6 seconds. The 3 human ships left at speed. The intelligence team analyzing the outgoing transmissions noted that one of the ships appeared to be broadcasting a music file during the retreat. They put this on page 47 of their report, added no comment, and hoped no one would ask them to explain it. Dreth stopped the footage. His aide Searle stood near the chamber door, very still, in the way Searle stood still when frightened and did not want Dreth to see it. "How long has the Empire been observing human space?" Dreth said. 63 years, Commander. Classification: Class 3 Primitive. Dreth looked at the dark screen. Get the Council. The High Council of the Galactic Empire met in the Spire of Reth on the capital world Vaughn, in a circular chamber built in an era when the Empire had been half its current size and significantly more willing to move quickly. 47 seats, 11 species represented. The chamber was circular, which the architects had recorded as a statement of equality. Dreth's seat was on a raised platform 3 centimeters above all the others. This had also been a decision of the architects. No one discussed this discrepancy. It had been there for 400 years. The footage played for the council. The silence afterward was specific. The silence of people who have arrived at the same thought simultaneously and are calculating whether it is safer to say it first or wait for someone else to say it out loud. Councillor Imrath of the Murren spoke first. The Murren were large, amphibious, and confident in a way that was usually inversely proportional to their actual preparedness. 3 scout ships, Imrath said. 1 engagement. We have convened the full council for this. We have convened the full council, Dreth said carefully. Because our tactical division has reviewed this engagement for 3 weeks and cannot produce an explanation." The room changed. Not loudly. A shift in posture across 47 seats. The way a crowd shifts when it stops being a crowd and starts being a group of individuals each doing private, frightened math. Counselor Tess of the Vesk was next. The Vesk were methodical and long-fingered and had a habit of considering every explanation before settling on the worst one. The exhaust gap. It is documented in our classified engineering files. If the humans accessed. They did not access our files. Dreth's voice did not rise. The security review is completed. No breach. No missing data. The Theron-class gap is present in every ship of that class because of the cooling system's geometry. The humans observed a Theron-class warship during normal operations and derived the gap themselves. Tess was very quiet. "They found a flaw in our best warship by watching it move," Dreth said. Old Counselor Bohr, the eldest Dolthari on the council, whose scales had gone the pale color of old snow and who had personally witnessed 6 interspecies wars, said nothing for a long moment. Then, "They have had warp capability for 40 years. No species achieves this level of tactical precision in 40 years. Something in the timeline is wrong." Or, Dreth said, "something in our understanding of what they were doing during those 40 years is wrong." This was the sentence that started the real argument. It ran for 4 hours. Dreth listened to most of it. In his experience, the content of an argument was less useful than its shape. What a room fought about most fiercely told you what it was most afraid of, and over 4 hours the council demonstrated 2 fears with great clarity. The first fear was comfortable. Perhaps the Empire had missed classified human facilities, hidden programs, decades of quiet weapons research that the observers had simply not found. This fear led naturally to increased surveillance and budget discussions. It placed the problem in a box the Empire knew how to handle. The second fear came up twice. Both times it appeared briefly in quieter voices, and both times the conversation moved quickly past it, but Dreth had heard it. The second fear was that there were no hidden programs, that the 3 ships were not the output of a weapons facility but the output of a way of thinking, a way of looking at things that humanity had developed, and that was the real threat, not whatever it had built but whatever had built it. This fear had no box. The Empire knew how to find weapons. It did not know how to find a way of thinking. The vote was not close. Immediate military action failed. Intelligence gathering passed. One operative, quiet, human space, find what the Empire had missed. Dreth already knew who he was sending before the vote finished. Veth had been recruited into Imperial intelligence at 22 years old, which in Korathi terms meant they had been about halfway through their first growth stage and still occasionally surprised by their own arms. 22 years later, Veth was not surprised by much. The Korathi were a tall people, angular in the bone, gray-skinned, with a posture other species sometimes described as elegant, in contexts that made Veth mildly uncomfortable and threatening in contexts that made Veth professionally useful. Veth was shorter than average, softer in the face, and had spent 2 decades learning how to stand in a room in a way that made them easy to forget. 9 missions, 6 species, 1 sealed file from the mission involving a Vesk admiral's household, which the mission summary described only as resolved successfully. Even Dreth did not have full access to those details. This was fine. Some work stayed quiet. The human file was thick. Veth read it in a small office above the station's docking ring, with something the cafeteria called tea, and a window open to the view of cargo haulers moving through the dark. Files like this one had a familiar shape, primitive world, internal conflict, a slow process of consolidation, usually driven by either a dominant power or a shared external threat. Contact with the Empire, either as trade opportunity or military target, Most species arrived at contact already shaped by this process, already in some quiet way broken in. Humanity's file had that shape for 40 pages. Then the shape changed. 80 years ago, the observers had been writing with suppressed urgency about a species that had enough weapons technology to end itself, and not quite enough collective wisdom to be certain it wouldn't. The analytical projections from that period were precise and consistent. Humanity would either stabilize within 40 years, or it would not stabilize at all. Most projections assumed the latter. 43 years ago, the large wars stopped. Not immediately, not perfectly. The reports from that period were full of minor conflicts and regional tensions, documented with the weary tone of people cataloging predictable weather. But the weapons that had been pointed at each other, the ones large enough to end the Empire's projections very permanently, stood down. And the hundreds of competing governments that had been tearing at each other for centuries began, slowly in pieces, to move in the same direction. Veth marked this page and went back to read it again. Because 43 years ago was almost exactly when the Empire's trade fleet had expanded its routes near the edge of what was now classified as human sensor range. Not close enough for official contact. Not close enough to be anything other than distant signals in the dark. But close enough to detect. Veth sat with this for a long time. Humans with 195 governments had not unified because of internal political evolution. Internal political evolution did not move that fast. Nothing moved that fast without a specific reason, a visible reason. Humanity had seen something in the dark. And then humanity had stopped fighting itself. Veth turned to page 71. The note there was 3 paragraphs from a field observer named Bith who had been stationed above human space for 3 years and was apparently either very bored or very thorough. The note had been flagged low priority and reviewed by no one with decision-making authority. Human academic institutions have demonstrated sustained, coordinated interest in xenobiology, xenolinguistics, and extraterrestrial engineering principles for the past decade. This interest appears consistent across research centers in multiple nations despite no apparent centralized coordinating body. The volume of published work has increased by 340% in 10 years. Recommend extended analysis. Priority: low. Low priority. Someone had read that note and given it a low rating and moved on to something else. Veth thought about what 40 years of coordinated, quietly escalating academic interest in alien biology and alien engineering would produce. In a species that had 195 governments moving together. A species that had seen something in the dark and decided, at a level that was apparently collective and apparently fast, that it needed to understand that thing before that thing understood it. The standard mission framing said, "Find the weapons programs." The note on page 71 suggested the standard framing was the wrong question. Veth picked up the cosmetics kit. The shuttle crossed into human space on the 6th day. On the 3rd day of the crossing, Veth found a section of the file that the Intelligence Division had buried in an appendix. A collection of intercepted human communications spanning 15 years, translated, covering topics the analysts had considered non-threatening. Most of it was noise, personal messages, news content, entertainment. But scattered through it across 15 years and dozens of human languages was a pattern. Humans asking each other questions about the galaxy, how many species were out there, what their ships looked like, how they fought, what they valued, what they feared. Not in any one place, not in any organized forum the analysts had flagged as suspicious, just humans being curious in the same direction for 15 years. Toward the Empire. The shuttle moved through the dark and Veth sat with the file and did not sleep much. In a building in a city on Earth, in a room that did not appear on any public map, a woman named Director Sarin looked at a screen showing an Imperial vessel crossing into human sensor range. She was not surprised. She had been expecting something like this for 4 years, since the Dominion incident, since the small team she had authorized did what she told them to do and came home. She turned to the man on her left. Sector 7 entry, single vessel, run the profile. The man turned to his screen. She looked out the window at a city, doing ordinary things in the afternoon light. Director profile match, Korathi, intelligence operative class. She nodded. Should we move protocol inheritor to standby? She thought about it for 3 seconds. Not yet, she said. Let them look. Let them see what we want them to see. She paused. And Demir, make sure Dr. Voss knows she may have a visitor at the university. Which protocol? Director Sarin walked to the door. Tell her to use her judgment. She left. Outside the window, the city moved through its afternoon in the way cities always do. Noise and traffic and people walking and light falling across buildings in the ordinary way of a world that was, to all outward appearances, entirely unprepared for what was coming. It was not unprepared. It had simply decided some time ago not to look like it. The city was called Portland. It was not a military city. Veth had established this within the first 2 hours of walking through it, which was longer than it should have taken because Veth kept expecting to find something that wasn't there. Hidden security checkpoints. The quiet tension that settles into a population that knows it is being watched. The specific, low-frequency dread of a people preparing for a war they think might be coming. Portland had a farmer's market on a Wednesday morning. Veth stood at the edge of it and watched humans buy vegetables from other humans, and children eat something wrapped in paper on wooden benches, and a man argue with a parking enforcement officer about where exactly the permitted zone ended. The argument was conducted at moderate volume, with some pointed gestures at a small painted line on the ground, and ended with the man paying something on his handheld device and walking away still talking, to no one in particular, in a tone that suggested he had many more thoughts on the subject but no audience left to share them with. This was not what a species on a war footing looked like. Veth kept walking. The Korathi cosmetics held in daylight better than expected. The bone structure was wrong at close range, but humans had a remarkable ability to see what they expected to see, and they expected to see another human. Veth walked at medium pace and made eye contact the appropriate amount, which the preparation materials had specified as more than Vesk, less than Murin. The advice was accurate. The public library was 3 blocks from the market. Veth went in because libraries were useful. They told you what a population thought was worth preserving. The balance between practical knowledge and philosophy, between history and entertainment, between the things a culture kept because they were useful, and the things it kept because they mattered. That balance told you something real about where a civilization's attention was pointed. The main floor had fiction and history, a children's section near the windows, a reading room with elderly humans on soft chairs and large print books. Veth went to the basement. The academic collection. 3 full aisles on xenolinguistics. Not theoretical xenolinguistics, not the philosophical kind that asked whether cross-species communication was even possible in principle. The practical kind. Aisle 1. Analysis of Korathi click language, 2 separate volumes, both with fresh spine creases. Aisle 2. A 6-volume comparative study of Murin dialect structures. A textbook called Applied Keth, a working framework for cross-species negotiation, its cover worn at the corners in the way things are worn when they are used rather than stored. 2 more aisles on xenobiology. 1 long shelf on comparative alien military history, covering the Empire's 6 most significant internal conflicts, sourced from publicly available imperial records, and cross-referenced with intercepted transmission data and analysis that Veth did not recognize and could not immediately source. Veth stood in that last aisle for a very long time. The Murin dialect structure volumes were not publicly available outside imperial academic circles. Veth had required a specific security clearance to access Murin linguistic files during preparation for the station mission 8 years ago. A 3-week review process, documentation, 2 sign-offs from senior intelligence staff. Someone had put it in a public library. In the basement, with fresh spine creases on the cover, because people were reading it. A library volunteer appeared. "Can I help you find anything?" "No," Veth said, "thank you." The volunteer smiled and moved on. Veth looked at the shelf. The university was 4 blocks north. Veth walked past it the first day, the second day. A window on the east side of a lecture building was open, and fragments of a lecture drifted out onto the sidewalk. The Keth flanking model isn't random, it's resource-driven. They rotate because sustained formation holding is metabolically expensive for Keth physiology, so Veth stopped walking. The Keth flanking model was classified tactical data. Its metabolic basis was classified at a higher level still. Before the Keth colonial mission, Dreth had personally signed off on Veth's access to that file. A 3-week clearance review, documentation in triplicate. This was an open window on a university building. Veth went in. The class was 3rd year, 50 students in tiered seating. The professor was a young woman named Dr. Kim, according to the whiteboard. She was talking about the Keth the way a person talks about a subject they have lived inside for a long time, not as foreign, not as exotic, as a system with internal logic that could be understood if you were willing to put in the work. Veth sat in the back and listened for 40 minutes. Dr. Kim covered Keth formation doctrine in precise detail. Murin naval logistics, with figures that matched the classified imperial assessments almost exactly, cited from human academic journals that had apparently published this information openly. A brief comparative analysis of Vesk defensive architecture and Korathi infiltration methodology that made the back of Veth's neck feel wrong. At the end, she took questions with patience and specificity. On the way out, Veth looked at the sign by the door. XCNO 301, Alien Military Systems, 3rd year undergraduate course. 3rd year. Undergraduate. The week built its picture in layers. A museum with a scale replica of a Vesk frigate in the main entrance hall, accurate to the secondary thruster placement. The label beneath it was informational and calm, reconstructed from public sensor data and spectral analysis. Commissioned 2087. That was 33 years ago. The model had been there for 33 years, and in 33 years, no one at the museum had thought to treat it as remarkable. A grocery store with a small section labeled Xenobiological Applications, products developed using principles derived from alien biochemistry, a wound closure compound that worked faster than standard human medicine, a water purification system based on undran filtration biology. The labels mentioned their alien sources the way food labels mentioned ingredients. Plainly, informatively, the way something is labeled when it is not a secret. A cafe with a television in the corner running a news program. A segment, mentioned briefly and without drama, about something called the Galactic Engagement Framework. A bureaucratic structure, apparently, that the human government had been developing for 15 years to govern first contact scenarios, trade negotiations, and cross-species legal disputes. 15 years of bureaucratic infrastructure. For first contact, which had not happened yet. Veth sat in that cafe for 2 hours with a cup of coffee and tried to find the correct way to hold what the city was showing. It was not a city preparing for war. It was not a city ignoring the galaxy. It was a city that had been, quietly and without any apparent urgency, absorbing everything it could find about the species it knew were out there, building the institutional infrastructure to deal with them whenever the moment came, and going about its daily business in the meantime with complete calm. The thing about it that was hardest to name was that it didn't look like a project. It looked like a habit. Marcus found Veth in the university's main cafe on the 8th day. Veth was holding a book on Dolthari cultural philosophy, chosen as cover, the kind of book a visiting academic might plausibly carry, when a young man with dark eyes and an apparently unlimited supply of opinions sat down uninvited across the table and pointed at the cover. "That's the Boer translation," he said. "The new one is better. Boer doesn't handle the third epic idioms well." Veth looked at him. "Marcus Reyes," he said, extending a hand. "Xenoarchaeology, 4th year. Are you visiting faculty?" "Something like that," Veth said. This was apparently enough to establish rapport, because Marcus ordered a coffee and began talking. He talked about his research with the specific enthusiasm of someone who had found the exact thing they were supposed to be doing with their life. The Xenoarchaeology program had been running for 12 years and had 400 students and an annual conference that drew researchers from 31 countries. Marcus had attended the last 3. He was working on a comparative analysis of pre-contact cultural markers across 8 alien civilizations, looking for patterns in how a society changed in the decades before it made contact with a more advanced species. "The markers are really consistent," Marcus said. "There's almost always an acceleration in documentation behavior, like a species starts trying to record everything at once, all the things they'd let slide for generations. And there's usually a big shift in how they handle internal conflict. Things that were unresolved for centuries start getting resolved." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Like they're tidying up." Veth said, "Why would they tidy up?" "Because contact changes the context. Whatever argument they were having before, borders, resources, ideology, it shrinks when something bigger appears outside. The inside problems start to look different. Smaller, more solvable," he shrugged. "We did the same thing, have been for 40 years. He said it without weight, not a confession, an obvious thing that everyone already knew. "You believe there is something outside," Veth said. Marcus looked at Veth with mild surprise at the question. "The warp signatures have been consistent for 40 years. Of course there's something outside." He grinned. "We just haven't been formally introduced yet." Veth said nothing. Marcus refilled his coffee and talked about the Berlin conference until the light outside the cafe windows had gone amber and then gray. The bar was small and warm and smelled of wood and something fried, and a particular kind of human ease that Veth had identified early in the week as this species' default operating condition among people they trusted. Dr. Ilara Voss was at the far end of the bar when they arrived. A small woman, white-haired, drinking something amber with the deliberate, even pace of someone making it last. She was watching the room with the quality of attention that looked, from the outside, like watching nothing. Veth felt it from across the room. 22 years of field work built a specific sensitivity to being watched by someone skilled at not appearing to watch. It registered in the body before the mind could name it. A small, precise pressure between the shoulder blades. Marcus introduced her with warmth. Dr. Ilara Voss, founder of the university's xenolinguistics program, retired 3 years ago, still came to this bar on Thursdays. She shook Veth's hand. Firm grip, dry palm. She looked at Veth's face for a moment, 3 seconds longer than social habit required, with the expression of someone recognizing a thing they have seen before in a different context. "You're not American," she said. "No," Veth said. She looked away. "I used to travel before I retired. You develop an eye for people who are far from home." She did not specify what kind of eye. She did not say what she was applying it to. The 3 of them talked for an hour. Marcus carried most of it. Dr. Voss contributed occasional sentences with the precision of someone who chose words the way a carpenter chooses tools. The right one, the first time, no excess. When she spoke about alien linguistics, She spoke with a specificity that Veth could not reconcile with any public academic record located during the week. She knew things that should not be public. She deployed them as though they were. When Marcus went to the bar for another round, Dr. Voss did not turn her head. She looked at her glass. Her voice was the same pleasant, unhurried voice she'd used to discuss the declension structure of Korathi-Click language 15 minutes earlier. "Tell your people," she said, "not to worry. We're not hiding anything dangerous." She took a small sip of her drink. "We're just not finished yet." She set her glass down. Marcus came back with 3 drinks and a story about the Berlin conference venue having a broken elevator last year, and what this meant for a conference that placed all the xenoarchaeology panels on the 4th floor. Dr. Voss smiled at the appropriate moments. She did not look at Veth again. Veth sat with both hands on the table and thought about what not finished yet meant. Coming from a woman who had spent 30 years building a program that taught humans to speak alien languages, in a city where classified imperial tactical data sat in a public library, in a species that had stopped its own wars the moment it detected the Empire moving through the dark nearby. The thought was cold. The bar was warm. Marcus was still talking. Veth smiled when he smiled and stayed until the bar closed. That night, in the small apartment above the laundry and the cafe, Veth sat at the window and looked at the city going quiet and thought about what the week had been trying to say. The mission framing was, find the weapons programs. The weapons programs were not here, not in the way that framing assumed. There was no secret facility producing new ships. There was no research station developing tactical systems in isolation. There were no armed soldiers hiding behind the farmer's market and the library and the university and the grocery store's xenobiological applications shelf. What was here was something that did not have a good name in Imperial Intelligence's vocabulary. A civilization that had decided, 40 years ago, to become very good at understanding the thing it was going to eventually meet, and had then gone ahead and done it. Distributed across every university and library and research program and retired professor who still came to the same bar on Thursdays. So thoroughly and so quietly that it did not look like preparation at all. It looked like culture. Veth opened the communication device. Began drafting the preliminary report. Stopped. Read page 71 of the original file again. Recommend extended analysis. Priority low. Veth looked at the window, at the city going dark outside it, at the last few people on the street below, walking home under the ordinary lights of an ordinary evening on a planet that had apparently spent 4 decades becoming something the Empire did not have a classification for. Close the communication device. Not yet. More time, more of the city. Because Dr. Voss had said not finished yet, and the word yet was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and Veth needed to understand what it was carrying before sending anything back to Dreth. The city was quiet. Veth sat at the window and did not sleep. On the 12th day, Veth followed the maintenance worker. This was not a dramatic thing. The man was round-shouldered, carried a thermos, and went through an unmarked door in the basement of the university's main research building at 6:15 in the morning. Veth had been watching unmarked doors for 12 days. This was the first one that felt different. It felt different because of what was outside it. The city's public utility maps were accessible online. Veth had pulled them 4 days ago. The power draw listed for this block, the university's research quadrant, was 340% of what the visible buildings would require. The excess had no listed explanation on any public record. The ventilation output from the basement system ran at a volume that did not correspond to the stated underground infrastructure. Something beneath this building was drawing significant power. Veth did not go through the door. Going through the door without knowing what was on the other side was how operatives became the cautionary case studies that younger operatives read in training. Instead, Veth stood at the corner of the building for 40 minutes in the early gray morning, watching the ventilation output, running the calculation. The numbers were not comfortable. What the power draw implied in terms of active floor space and running systems was not a research lab. It was not a single facility. It was something the size of several city blocks, underground beneath this university. And this was one location. The utility maps showed 11 others in the metropolitan area with similar unexplained draws, similar signatures, similar gaps between what was stated and what the numbers implied. 12 locations. One city. Veth thought about how many cities humanity had, turned around and walked back to the apartment to write the report. The report was 6 pages. Veth had been trained to write concisely, and 6 pages from Veth meant content that could not be compressed further without losing something essential. The first 3 pages were standard: cover observations, social mapping, civilian behavior patterns, the library and the classified military information flagged as requiring explanation, the university lecture with the Keth formation data cross-referenced against the security clearance level of that information. Page 4 was the Marcus conversation, quoted without editorializing, because the content was specific enough not to require it. Page 5 was Dr. Voss, her exact words, both sentences. Page 6 was the power draw analysis, and the 12 underground locations, and the calculation of what they implied. Veth sent it, then sat at the window above the laundry and looked at the street below, where a woman was walking a dog and a man was opening a flower shop, and thought about what the report would look like to someone reading it cold, without the experience of 12 days in this city behind it. It would look like evidence of a weapons program. It was not evidence of a weapons program. Weapons facilities had a signature Veth had learned across 22 years of fieldwork. They had security perimeters. They had a specific pattern of vehicle movement. They had an ambient tension that lived in the people who worked near them, the low-grade stress of a kept secret, the way a lie lives in the body of the person telling it. This city did not have that tension. Dr. Voss did not have it. Marcus did not have it. The students in XEN 0301 did not have it. They had something else, something that had taken 12 days to correctly identify. They had patience, the deep, settled patience of people who have been working towards something for a long time and know they are close. The report went. What came back 12 hours later was not a response from intelligence. It was a fleet deployment order. High Commander Dreth had not waited for the full report. The partial intelligence that arrived before Veth's 6 pages, earlier intercepts, initial observations from the arrival ship, had been enough for the faction of the Council that had wanted military action from the beginning. Bohr had argued against it. Tess had requested 30 more days of intelligence gathering. Imrath had pressed for action since the Asterisk Dominion footage, and with the partial reports now adding to the picture, had finally accumulated enough support. 47 warships, 3 Theron-class, which was a political statement as much as a military one, 44 support vessels, troop transports, and logistics ships. They were moving. Dreth read Veth's full report in his office above the fleet staging area. He read it once at speed, and then sat for a moment, and then read page 6 again. 12 underground locations, 1 city, power draw suggesting floor space that did not correspond to any stated infrastructure. He sent one message back. Have you identified what the facilities are producing? Veth's response came 6 hours later, too long for a simple answer. Not weapons, something else. Give me more time. Dreth looked at the deployment order on his secondary screen. There was no more time. Director Sarin received word of the fleet movement 4 days before Imperial intelligence, had finished transmitting the deployment order to its own forward stations. She sat with the information for 11 minutes, then she called her team. The room was underground, in a building in a city the Empire had classified as a single human population center, which was one of several thousand things the Empire had gotten wrong about humanity. 12 people, 3 screens, very good coffee, which Soren had decided long ago was not a luxury but a professional requirement. Fleet is moving, 47 ships, 19 days to human space. She looked at the room, protocol inheritor, authorization Soren 77 Delta, full activation. Someone at the screens entered a sequence. Someone else exhaled. Demir looked up from his console. Prometheus archive is live, all nodes, full integration confirmed. Soren nodded. The Prometheus archive had not been named by anyone important. It had been named by a physicist in 2032 who was working late on a cross-species materials database and had apparently gotten a little dramatic about it. The name stuck because the project grew too large too fast for anyone to have the administrative bandwidth to change it. It had started as a documentation effort. In 2031, 8 years after the first confirmed warp signature detection, a working group had been assembled. At the time, calling it the human government was optimistic. 195 separate nations, most of them still arguing about things that had been argued about for centuries. The working group's mandate was simple: assume contact is coming. Assume it will not be on humanity's terms. Prepare accordingly. The preparation had components. The first was language. Every alien signal the Empire had ever broadcast near enough for human instruments to detect had been captured and analyzed. The xenolinguistics program that Dr. Voss had built in Portland was one of 43 similar programs across 26 countries. They had spent 40 years cross-referencing their findings, arguing about their conclusions, and then cross-referencing again. By 2061, human linguists had working models for 11 distinct alien languages. By 2074, working model no longer covered what they had. The second component was biology. Every species whose biosignatures could be resolved from warp emissions and electromagnetic profiles had been studied and modeled. Human medicine had taken a strange detour in the 2040s, driven by xenobiological research that had no obvious immediate application, and which had produced over 30 years a range of advances that the medical journals described as novel approaches to physiology, without specifying whose physiology they had originally studied. The third component was tactics. This was the component that the Imperial observers had never found, because it was not in any single facility. It was distributed. It lived in universities and research institutes and in the heads of graduate students and retired professors, cross-referenced in a system that used humanity's near-inexhaustible tolerance for argument and disagreement as a feature. If 6 researchers in 6 countries who could barely agree on terminology had all converged independently on the same tactical conclusion about Keth formation doctrine, the conclusion was probably correct. If 4 of them agreed and 2 did not, they kept arguing until they resolved it. The system was slow and loud and difficult to coordinate. It was also immune to being shut down because it was not a single thing that could be shut down. It was everywhere. The Prometheus archive is not a building, Soren said to the room, for the benefit of 2 new team members who had joined in the past year. She said this every time. It is not a program in the organizational sense. It is 40 years of this civilization pointing itself at a question and being very thorough about the answer. Demir pulled the summary display onto the main screen. The numbers were as they had always been, updated weekly, occasionally revised when new analysis completed. 11 alien languages with active human speaker populations, detailed physiological profiles for 9 alien species, tactical analysis of 7 alien military doctrines, each stress-tested, technology breakdowns for 6 alien engineering traditions, including 3 Imperial warship classes, the Theron-class exhaust configuration, the Murin Naval Formation Library, the Vesk shielding harmonic system, and the one that had required the most creative sourcing, the one Sauron was most proud of and least willing to explain in detail, the Theron-class shielding array rotation frequency, obtained from a 4-second window of unshielded emission data during a shielding failure near a system the Empire believed to be uninhabited. The system had appeared uninhabited. It had not been. "Our team leads briefed," Sauron said. "All of them. Ground forces are on standby. Admiral Chen has had Protocol Inheritor for a week and has been running counter-scenarios." Sauron looked at the display. 19 days. "When the Imperial fleet arrives," she said, "let them get close. Let them see civilian ships. Let them think they have the full picture." She walked to the coffee station. "Then show them the picture has a backside." Veth received the fleet deployment notification and Dreth's single follow-up question at the same time. "Have you identified what the facilities are producing?" Veth looked at both pieces of information for a long time. Sent the response, "Not weapons, something else. Give me more time." Sat at the window. The fleet was moving. Whatever Veth had almost worked out beneath a university basement in Portland was now irrelevant in the specific way that irrelevance arrives when a larger machine has already started moving. The question of what the 12 underground locations contained would answer itself in 19 days, and the answer would be given not in a report, but in whatever happened when 47 Imperial warships met a species that had spent 4 decades building something Veth could not yet name. Veth sent one more message to Dreth. Not a report, not a status update. "Whatever you think you're going to find, that's not what you're going to find." Then close the communication device, because the fleet was already in transit and Dreth could not stop it, and there was nothing left to do but wait. 19 days. Outside the window, the flower shop had opened. The smell of it, green and living, something that did not translate well into Korathi, drifted up from the street. Veth thought about Dr. Voss at the bar, not looking, voice perfectly calm, saying not finished yet as if it were a minor weather observation. Thought about Marcus, talking about how species tidied up their internal conflicts before first contact, how the context changed, how the inside problems looked smaller when something bigger appeared outside. Humanity had seen the Empire in the dark 43 years ago and stopped fighting itself. In 43 years, they had built the Prometheus Archive. They had built 12 underground locations beneath one city, more beneath others, certainly. They had published classified Imperial tactical data in a public library. They had taught 3 generations of undergraduates Keth formation doctrine as a third-year course requirement. And Dr. Voss, the woman who had built the program, who had spent 30 years making human mouths speak alien languages, had looked at Veth across a bar and said not finished. Not we were ready, not we are ready, not come and see what we built. Not finished yet. The flower shop below had a display of something yellow in the window. Veth did not know what it was called. It was very bright against the gray morning. The Empire had been watching humanity for 63 years. Humanity had been watching the Empire for 40. And humanity, apparently, was still working. Veth looked at the yellow flowers and thought about what a species that had unified in 3 years, learned 11 alien languages in 40, and found an exhaust flaw in the Empire's best warship through 15 years of thermal imaging. What that species might still be building that had not yet made it into any library basement or undergraduate course or second-hand grocery store label. What was still underground, still unfinished. The morning was cold and ordinary. The city did not look like what it was. 19 days. The Imperial fleet dropped out of warp at the edge of human space on the 19th day, exactly on schedule, and Commander Vrex of the Eternal Victory opened a channel to the human communications network and issued a formal demand for surrender. This was standard procedure. Most species, presented with 47 Imperial warships in their home system, responded with some variation of compliance. The psychological weight of the fleet's physical presence had ended 3 wars before the first shot was fired. Vrex had commanded this kind of opening 6 times. It worked because the math was visible. 47 warships was not an argument. It was a statement of fact. The human response came back in 17 seconds. It was in Vrex's language, not rooted through an Imperial translation system. A human voice, speaking Theran dialect Korathi, the regional dialect of the species that built the Eternal Victory, with a slight accent that Vrex's communications officer identified as something called Southern Coastal, a regional variation within the Korathi language that the Empire had documented, one that had never been expected from the other side of a first contact channel. The voice said in clean, correct Theran dialect Korathi, "We received your message. Our response is no. Please clarify your intentions before moving closer." Vrex's communications officer looked at Vrex. Vrex looked at the fleet display. "Move to engagement range," Vrex said. Formation 7. Formation 7 was the Theran-class flanking array. 3 Theran-class warships in a wide arc, support vessels filling the calculated gaps, the entire structure designed to present more targeting solutions simultaneously than most species' defensive systems could prioritize. The Empire had used Formation 7 41 times. It had worked 41 times. Vrex had used it twice personally. The fleet moved into position. The humans were quiet. Then, from the civilian shipping lanes on the far side of the system, a cluster of signals appeared on the display. Small ships, fast, scout-class configuration, the same category that had killed the Dominion. Vrex counted them quickly. 17. 17 scout ships against 47 warships, 3 of them Theran-class. The math was not close. Vrex opened a targeting channel, locked forward batteries on. The fleet's communication system filled with noise. Not random interference, a specific pattern harmonically calibrated. Vrex heard it for a fraction of a second before the filters engaged, recognized its structure in that fraction, understood what it was targeting. This was not general signal jamming. It was built for the Theran-class targeting array specifically, for the frequency range, for the filtering algorithm. The signal was designed around the Eternal Victory's own system, the way a key is designed around a specific lock. The filters cleared it in 9 seconds. 11 seconds was what it had taken to clear the signal during the Dominion engagement. The Empire had spent 3 weeks analyzing that 11-second window and reducing it to 9, 2 seconds less. The human scouts had moved in those 9 seconds. Formation 7 had an inner boundary, a radius inside which the wide arc lost its geometric advantage because the 3 warships' fields of fire began to overlap, creating blind spots that the formation was not designed to handle at close range. Managing this was simple. You did not let enemy ships inside the inner boundary. The formation assumed no one would be fast enough or precise enough to find the gaps in the outer guard line. The 17 human scouts were inside the inner boundary. Vrex's tactical officer was already running the numbers on how the scouts had moved through the guard line. The preliminary results were not comfortable. The scouts had threaded the outer guard vessels through a gap that required specific knowledge of Formation 7's internal geometry. That geometry was in Imperial classified tactical files. "Reposition to Formation 12, Vrex said. Formation 12 was a Murin design the Empire had adopted 40 years ago. It was not in the same tactical database as Formation 7. Different classification level, different origin, different access requirements. It was the Empire's standard fallback from a compromised Formation 7, but standard fallback was internal shorthand, not published doctrine. The human scouts adjusted before Formation 12 was complete. The tactical officer's voice, very carefully. They were already moving before we finished the formation, sir, before we completed the shift. That's not possible, Vrex said. They could not know what we shift to when 7 is compromised. A pause. No, the tactical officer said. They couldn't. Another pause, unless they know our decision sequence. Not just the formations, the decision tree, the if-this-then-that logic of how Imperial commanders responded to specific tactical situations. Vrex looked at the display. The 17 human scouts had redistributed. Each one had found a position in the space where Formation 12 was assembling, not random positions, each one placed in optimal relation to a different component of the forming array. 17 ships, 17 Imperial weaknesses, 1 ship for each. As if they had been assigned targets before they launched. All vessels halt advance, hold position. The second engagement happened 6 hours later, after Vrex spent the intervening time in a communication with Dreth. Dreth had listened to the Formation 7 analysis. He had listened to the Formation 12 analysis. He had not said much. He had asked one question. When you shifted formations, how long did the human ships take to respond to the shift? They were moving before the shift was complete, Vrex said. 11 seconds from my order to their movement. A Formation 7 to 12 shift takes 40 to 60 seconds to complete physically. Yes. So they started responding when they had seen 11 seconds of a 60-second maneuver. Vrex said nothing. They modeled your decision, Dreth said, flat, precise, like reading something from a page. They knew that if 7 was compromised, you would shift to 12. They anticipated the shift before you had executed it. They did not react to what you did. They reacted to what you were going to do. The communication was quiet for a moment. High Commander, Vrex said, the decision to shift from 7 to 12 in a compromised situation is an internal command protocol. It is not published. It is not in any document the humans could have accessed. No, Dreth said, it is not. This was, Vrex felt, the most frightening exchange of the communication. The second engagement was the one that made the shape of the thing real. Vrex had regrouped the fleet at the outer boundary, brought the 3 Theron-class warships into a direct approach formation, not a complex flanking array, not a pattern that required geometric knowledge to exploit. Just 3 of the most powerful warships in the Empire moving toward the human ships in a straight line. Mass worked. Mass was not a formation that could be anticipated or outmaneuvered. It was simply overwhelming physical presence moving through space. The human civilian ships moved away toward the system's outer edge. The scouts pulled back toward the planet. The 3 Theron-class warships advanced. They were deep into the inner system before anyone noticed what the human planet's orbital defense grid had been doing during the 3 minutes it took the fleet to cross the gap. It had been calibrating. The Theron-class shielding array rotated through a harmonic frequency sequence as its standard operating mode. Rotating frequency was harder to defeat than a fixed one. To penetrate it required timing a pulse to land in the window between rotations, and the rotation speed and sequence were classified at the highest level. The orbital defense grid pulsed in a sequence that hit every window. Not most of them, not enough of them to be a successful guess. Every single rotation window, precisely timed, for all 3 Theron-class warships simultaneously. 3 ships, 3 separate shielding systems, each one operating independently. Each one hit in the window between its own rotations with a pulse calibrated to its specific frequency sequence. The tactical officer's voice was doing the careful thing again. "They have the rotation specifications. Sir, they have the full rotation specifications for the Theron-class shielding array." "I can see that," Vrex said. "These are first-tier classified files. This is not something that can be derived from external observation. This is not something that—" "I am aware," Vrex said. The 3 warships had taken hits to secondary systems. Not fatal, not crippling. Demonstration-level damage, precise and controlled, that communicated what could have been done without doing it. Then the fleet medical officer sent a report. The 3rd Theron-class ship, the Relentless, carried a Keth crew contingent. 14 members, standard for joint species operations. The Relentless had been hit by a pulse that its systems had classified as minor, a glancing impact on the starboard secondary array. Acceptable damage. The medical officer's report said otherwise. The Keth contingent had all lost consciousness simultaneously. All 14. At the same moment. The medical officer's note was precise and baffled. The pulse appears to have incorporated a subsonic frequency component calibrated to Keth auditory physiology. The Keth crew members are unharmed but fully incapacitated. All 14, simultaneously. The pulse appears to have been designed not to damage ship systems, but to specifically target the Keth crew members, while leaving non-Keth crew members unaffected. Vrex read this. "Read it again." The pulse had been designed for the Keth crew specifically, not as a side effect. As the primary target, the humans had known before firing that the Asterisk Relentless carried a Keth contingent, had known the size, had built a weapon that was not a ship weapon but a Keth weapon, constructed from detailed knowledge of Keth physiology, calibrated to incapacitate Keth crew members specifically, designed to remove them from the tactical equation while leaving the ship and the non-Keth crew intact. Surgical. Targeted. Like they had a crew manifest. Vrex opened a fleet-wide channel. "All vessels, send your crew species compositions to my terminal immediately." The reports came in over 3 minutes, 47 ships. 11 species distributed across the fleet in the patterns that had developed over years of joint operations. Korathi heavy in the intelligence vessels, Murren heavy in the naval line ships, Vesk concentrated in the engineering corps, Senior Dolthari in the command structure. Vrex looked at the composition breakdown and thought about what a species with detailed physiological profiles for every species in the fleet could do with that information. Thought about 17 other species-specific weapons, calibrated and waiting. "Get me High Commander Dreth," Vrex said. The communications officer hesitated. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." Vrex turned. The voice on the channel was human, speaking Korathi with that slight coastal accent, very calm, the particular calm of someone who has been waiting to say something for a long time. "Commander Vrex, we want to be clear. We are not going to destroy your fleet. We are going to demonstrate over the next 24 hours that we know the capabilities of each of your ships, the physiological requirements of each of your species, and the tactical logic of each of your command protocols. We will demonstrate this without killing anyone. After 24 hours, we would like to discuss terms." A pause. "We recommend you review the attached file before making any further tactical decisions." The file was 700 pages. Vrex opened it. The first section was a complete breakdown of Imperial military doctrine, standard formations, fallback sequences, contingency protocols that existed only in sealed command documents. The second section was classified technical specifications for 6 Imperial warship classes, annotated with the human research methods used to obtain each piece of data, none of which involved any breach of Imperial security. All of it observation, all of it analysis. All of it derived from watching passing ships, from listening to broadcast signals, from studying the shape of things from the outside for a very long time. The third section was species-specific biological and physiological vulnerability profiles. There were 11 of them, one for each species in the fleet. Sourced, according to the document's own footnotes, from human academic journals. Published openly. For the past 30 years. Vrex sat down. It was something Vrex very rarely did during an engagement. The 24 hours that followed were, as promised, bloodless. They were also the most precise and comprehensive demonstration of tactical knowledge Vrex had seen in 20 years of fleet command. Maneuvers anticipated before they were complete. Communication frequencies identified and selectively disrupted, not jammed, selected, specific frequencies targeted while others were left open, so the fleet could still function but nothing sensitive could be transmitted without the humans already knowing it. Intership coordination signals rerouted through human systems and returned with small modifications that served no military purpose, except to demonstrate that they could be modified. At hour 19, the human tactical team sent a note. It was addressed to the commander of the Asterisk Relentless specifically. It said that the 14 Keth crew members had experienced no adverse effects from the incapacitation pulse and would fully recover within 6 hours. It included a brief summary of the physiological mechanism involved, and a note from a human physician expressing professional regret for the discomfort and wishing the Keth crew members a quick recovery. The note was signed by a Dr. Yara Chen, Director of Diplomatic Integration. Vrex read it twice, then opened the channel to High Commander Dreth. "The demonstration is complete," Vrex said. "They are ready to negotiate." Dreth, on the other end, was quiet for a moment. "What do they want?" Vrex looked at the 700-page file on the secondary screen, looked at the dark space around the fleet, quiet and unchanged, the human planet sitting in it like it had always been there, which it had. "They want a table," Vrex said. "That's all. They want to sit down at a table." Another silence. "Did we ever have a choice about that?" Dreth asked. Vrex thought about Formation 7, about the 9-second noise signal calibrated to the Asterisk Eternal Victory's Asterisk-specific targeting array, about 14 Keth crew members, unconscious, and a physician's note expressing professional regret. "No," Vrex said, "I don't think we did." The ceasefire was signed on the 43rd day. It was not a pleasant 43 days. Vrex's fleet held position at the outer system boundary, read the 700-page file, and transmitted it in full to Dreth, who transmitted it to the High Council, who spent 6 days arguing about whether the document was genuine and 4 more days arguing about what to do given that it was. The 24-hour demonstration had been, as promised, bloodless. Over the course of one human day, the fleet had watched its formations anticipated before completion, its communication frequencies identified and selectively disrupted, its intership coordination signals rerouted through human systems, and returned with small modifications that served no military function except to demonstrate that they could be made. On hour 21, a human tactical team had broadcast a live correction to an Imperial navigation calculation that one of Vrex's junior officers had made, using the Asterisk Relentless's Asterisk own computational shorthand notation that was not published outside the Imperial Naval Corps, with a note suggesting a more efficient approach. They had corrected the math. Using notation they should not have known. The note was polite. By hour 24, the council had stopped arguing about whether to negotiate and started arguing about who to send. This argument lasted 19 more days, which was long even by council standards. On the 43rd day, the ceasefire was signed and a delegation arrived in orbit to be brought down to the planet. Dr. Yara Chen was waiting for them at the bottom. She arrived at the Spire of Reth on a human vessel that the Empire's docking crew spent 20 minutes examining before allowing it to land. The vessel was not particularly advanced by Imperial standards. This was, by now, expected. The humans had not built their advantage in hull plating or engine output. They had built it somewhere else entirely, and the unremarkable ship sitting in the Spire's docking bay was a reminder that the thing to worry about was not the ship. It was the people inside it who had spent 40 years deciding what to know. Dr. Chen disembarked with 2 aides and a small travel bag. She looked at the Spire with the expression of someone who has been shown photographs of a place enough times that it feels familiar before being seen in person. Not awe, recognition. She was 34 years old and looked younger. She was the daughter of Admiral Chen, who had commanded the fleet during the 24-hour demonstration, and she was the Prometheus Archive's Director of Diplomatic Integration, a position the Archive had created 8 years ago on the grounds that contact was coming, and someone should be formally ready to have a conversation. She spoke Theran dialect Korathi with the slight coastal accent. She also greeted Counselor Bohr in Doltari as they entered the chamber, first language Doltari, the old formal register, the one that Bohr's generation had grown up speaking before the standardized imperial dialect became dominant. Bohr went very still for a moment in the way of someone being spoken to in the language of their childhood, by a source they had not expected. He recovered, took his seat. Dr. Chen sat at the table's center, not at the edge in the visitor's position. At the center, Dreth looked at this choice for a moment and said nothing about it. "You will explain the Prometheus Archive," he said. "Yes," she said, "I will." She did not use notes. "In 2031, she began, "we confirmed that warp signatures were present in nearby space, not human-generated. We had been debating the probability of other life for a century, so the confirmation wasn't a surprise. What was a surprise was how close you were, how long the Empire had been passing through our sensor range without stopping." She looked at Dreth, without looking down. "You were not yet a priority contact," Dreth said. "Yes," she said. "We understood that. It was actually helpful. It gave us time." She explained the archive the way someone explains a place they have lived inside for their entire professional life, not as a presentation prepared for an audience, as a description of something they know very well. The language programs first, 40 years, 11 active alien languages. With human speaker populations distributed across academic communities on every continent, cross-referenced by researchers who had never met each other, and had reached the same conclusions independently. This was the methodology, she explained. If a finding survived the disagreement of 6 independent research teams who could barely agree on terminology, the finding was probably correct. The biological program second. Xenobiological research that had produced, among other things, the Keth incapacitation pulse, the Murin formation disruption tools, 17 different species-specific interventions that the 24-hour demonstration had not used but that existed and were ready and were, she noted without elaboration, catalogued. The tactical program's third, 30 years of analysis, published in journals, built in a distributed system across thousands of institutions, not housed in one place, not operated by one organization. Housed everywhere, operated by everyone who had contributed to it, which was, she paused here, seeming to do a brief mental calculation, in the range of 400,000 people across the past 4 decades, working in pieces, cross-referencing without always knowing what they were cross-referencing toward. The council was quiet throughout. Counselor Tess of the Vesk spoke once. "The Theran exhaust configuration, you derived that through spectral analysis. Thermal imaging and spectral analysis combined. 15 years of data from passing Theran-class vessels. The gap is geometrically predictable from the cooling system design once you have enough thermal data to model the interior. We had enough by 2072. The shielding array rotation frequency," Tess said. That cannot be derived from external observation. No, Dr. Chen agreed. That one we obtained from the Solis incident. The room changed. Tess was very still. The Solis incident is sealed at the highest classification level. Yes, Dr. Chen did not add anything to this. She waited. The Solis incident was, as far as the Council's knowledge extended, an internal Imperial matter from 19 years ago. A Theron-class warship had experienced a partial shielding array failure near a system that subsequent survey had confirmed as uninhabited. The failure had been repaired in the field. The incident was in sealed files. The system had appeared uninhabited. Imrath of the Murren, who had not spoken since the meeting began, said slowly, "You had people there." "We had instruments there," Dr. Chen said. "Passive collection arrays, low electromagnetic signature, placed in uninhabited systems near Imperial trade and patrol routes for 20 years. The shielding failure on the vessel in question gave us a 4-second window of unshielded emission data." She folded her hands on the table. 4 seconds was enough. The silence that followed was the kind that happens after a revelation that changes the shape of a problem retroactively. Not just the present problem, all the past ones. The whole 63-year history of the Empire's observation of humanity, reread in light of the fact that humanity had also been observing, carefully, patiently, with instruments in uninhabited systems along the Empire's own routes, for at least 20 of those years. Dreth said, "Why did you not act sooner? You had the tactical information. The Dominion was a demonstration. You could have struck the fleet before it deployed." Dr. Chen looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Why wait?" She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, choosing. "Because we're not finished yet," she said. The words sat in the chamber. Old Boar looked up from his hands. Dreth heard it the way he had heard it in Veth's report. Page 5. The old woman at the bar, not finished yet. The same phrase, said with the same quality, not a warning, not a boast, a simple statement of where things stood. "What does that mean?" Dreth said. "It means the Prometheus archive is 40 years of work," Dr. Chen said. "It means we know a great deal about the Empire and its member species and its military and political structure. It means that what I have described to you today is accurate and complete." She paused. "It also means we have been working on a second question alongside the first one." "What is the second question?" "The first question was, what is out there and what do we need to know about it? The Prometheus archive is the answer to the first question. We built it because we needed to be safe, because we needed to ensure that whatever came out of the dark came to a table and not a conquest." She looked at the council. "The second question is different. We started asking it about 11 years ago." Dreth waited. She smiled. It was a genuine smile, the smile of someone who finds their subject genuinely, deeply wonderful. "What else is out there," she said, "that we haven't found yet?" The peace treaty was 6 pages. Mutual recognition, defined borders, trade framework, the beginning of something that the human draft submitted for review before the Imperial team had finished its own version, called the Galactic Common Framework, which was the bureaucratic infrastructure humanity had been building for 15 years for precisely this occasion. Dreth signed it. Dr. Chen signed it. The 2 aides witnessed it. She left the same afternoon, on the unremarkable ship, with the same small bag she had arrived with. Councillor Tess found Councillor Boar in the corridor outside the chamber. He was standing at a window that looked down at the city below the spire. He was not moving. "The second question," Tess said. "What else is out there?" Boar said. "We have been mapping the galaxy for 400 years, Tess said. "We have a thorough picture." Boar was quiet for a moment. His scales, old and pale, caught the light from the window. "We had a thorough picture of humanity," he said. "We had 63 years of observation. We called them Class 3 primitive. We did not look carefully enough. He paused. How many other Class 3 classifications are in the survey database? Tess did not answer. She knew the number. They are not studying us anymore, Bohr said. We signed the treaty. They are safe. The thing that started the archive, the threat, the fire under them, it is resolved. Now they are turning toward the question they were apparently always more interested in. We don't know what they've found, Tess said. No, Bohr agreed. We don't. He looked at the city below. That woman spoke Dolthari, first language register, the old formal form. The program that produced her has been running for 40 years. The people it trained spent their careers preparing for us. He turned from the window. What does the next generation do? The ones who grow up after the treaty, after we are no longer the thing that started all of this? Tess had no answer. Bohr walked down the corridor. They looked at the galaxy, he said, more to himself than to her now, and they found us. And we are apparently not the most interesting thing they found. His footsteps were quiet on the old stone floor. I wonder, he said, as he reached the corridor's end, what is? Deep below a mountain in a country called Norway, in a facility that did not appear in the Prometheus Archive's public documentation, a team of 9 people worked in a room with very good coffee and screens that displayed signals from a region of the galaxy the Empire had surveyed in 2089 and classified as empty. The survey had not been wrong exactly. There were no inhabited planets in that region, no warp signatures, no electromagnetic broadcasts of the kind that indicated active civilization. The Empire's survey instruments had found nothing, and the Empire's survey instruments were good. The signals had started 11 years ago. They were not imperial, they were not human, they were not anything in the Prometheus Archive's catalog, which was, at this point, a catalog of 11 species with extensive documentation. Whatever was producing these signals was not in the catalog. Whatever was producing these signals was not, based on the archive's models of civilizational development, a young species. The patterns were too structured. The information density was too high. The signals were old. Older than the Empire. Older than the Empire's survey history, by a margin that the team's chronologists had spent 2 years arguing about and had finally, recently, agreed on. The signals were approximately 40,000 years old, which meant that whatever produced them had been producing them when humanity was still working out agriculture, when the Empire's oldest member species were still in their first technological phase, when the galaxy, as far as anyone had known at the time, contained nothing capable of deliberate interstellar communication. Something had been communicating into the galaxy for 40,000 years. And 11 years ago, close enough to human space to detect, that communication had included something new, a change in the pattern, a structural element that the team had not seen in the earlier signals. A repetition, deep in the data, patient and exact, like a question asked again and again by something that was not in a hurry, like something that had been sending out a signal for 40,000 years and had, 11 years ago, adjusted that signal, pointed it, refined it, changed its character in a way that was small but unmistakable to anyone paying careful enough attention. The team lead was a woman named Dr. Myra Osai. She had been in this room for 9 of the 11 years. She had not attended the peace treaty meeting. She had not been invited to the peace treaty meeting because Director Soren had decided correctly that the peace treaty meeting was not the right time to introduce the second question. The second question required more time, more work, more of the patient, distributed, cross-referenced methodology that had cracked 11 languages in 40 years. This language was taking longer. But they were making progress. Dr. Osai looked at the latest analysis on her screen. There was a structure in the new section of the signal that they had not seen before, a sub-pattern within the repetition, smaller, more complex. She had been looking at it for 3 days. Her best linguist, a young man named Quame who had joined the team 2 years ago and who had the specific quality of attention that made Dr. Osai glad she had hired him, had been looking at it for 3 days too. He was currently asleep on the small couch in the corner of the room. He had been awake for 31 hours. She looked at the sub-pattern. It had the structure. She had been turning this over for 3 days, not wanting to say it until she was more certain. It had the structure of something that was not just broadcasting. Something that was asking. Not randomly, not into the dark in all directions. The signal had been broadcasting in all directions for 40,000 years. The change 11 years ago had been a narrowing, a focusing. The adjusted signal was pointed at a specific region of space. The region of space containing Earth. The Empire's survey instruments had found nothing in that distant region and classified it as empty. And the Empire survey instruments were good, and the region was, by any standard the Empire used, empty. But something in that empty region had been watching the galaxy for 40,000 years, and 11 years ago it had noticed something in the region of a small, blue, previously unremarkable planet, and had asked a question. Into the dark, patient as something that has all the time it needs. Waiting for a species careful enough, and thorough enough and curious enough to eventually hear it. Dr. Osei reached for her coffee. "Quame," she said, not loudly. He was awake in an instant, the way people are awake who have been sleeping on a problem rather than resting from one. He came to the screen, looked at what she was pointing to. He was quiet for a long moment. "It's asking something," he said. "I think so," she said. "Do we answer?" She looked at the signal, at the 40,000-year patience of it, at the 11-year-old adjustment pointed here waiting. She thought about the Prometheus archive, about 40 years of her civilization pointing itself at a question and being very thorough, about what that thoroughness had built and what it had kept safe, and how it had brought them to a table instead of a conquest. About what Dr. Chen had said to the Imperial Council. What else is out there that we haven't found yet? "Not yet," Dr. Osai said. She looked at the screen. "We're not finished yet." The signal played in the room below the mountain, patient and old and waiting, and humanity, characteristically, thoroughly, with all the time it needed, kept asking questions.